I'm Ashley Dvorkin for Fox 411. There are many celebrations taking place to mark the 50th anniversary of the day the Beatles made their U.S. debut on The Ed Sullivan Show, February 9th, 1964. Many are sharing how the music of the Beatles has influenced their lives, including our guest today who wrote a book about it. It's journalist Jerry Hester. The book is Raising a Beatle Baby, How John, Paul, George, and Ringo helped us come together as a family. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, exciting week for you.
It's great. I mean, it's all been, working up to this. There are concerts here in New York and beyond. New York City Fab 50 concerts at the Apollo Theater, Town Hall, the Hudson Theater. The Fest for Beatle fans, which is going to be at the Grand Hyatt Hotel, February 7th, 8th, and 9th. So tracking the day they arrived to the day they played Ed Sullivan. And they're expecting thousands upon thousands of fans. It's going to be a Beatles city.
Well, tell us your story. How did you get into the Beatles music? And what is it about their music, their story, that, you've been so loyal for so many years?
It's funny. A lot of us weren't born when the Beatles came to America in 1964. I certainly wasn't. In fact, 210 million Americans weren't around when the Beatles arrived in the United States. So I was born basically the month before they did their last stadium concert. So, like for a lot of folks, Beatles, to use one of their terms, were always here, there, and everywhere for me. So the music was just pervasive. I've always had older cousins and an aunt and people in school, so it was just always there. And there's something about it that I think it hits people at different times in their lives. But it's, they really last because of that music. And different generations find it at different times and in different ways.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your story, in particular, how it helped you connect with your wife, and how you made sure that your daughter was very familiar with the music of the Beatles.
Well, when my wife and I, before we were even going out, we were having a conversation about what's the best Beatle album, and I found that we were arguing. I found we were arguing a lot. And I found, why is this woman infuriating me? Certainly Sgt. Pepper is better than Revolver. But we found that we had a connection, and that's one of the ways that we kind of joined together. In fact, we took it a little further than a lot of people would, in that we went to Liverpool on our honeymoon. With our daughter, she was born into a Beatle household. I was, serenading her with Love Me Do while she was still in the womb. So she grew up around the music, and it was always second nature to her. Also, in terms of, having DVDs of the movies of Yellow Submarine and Hard Day's Night. So the music was always there for her, too. And of course, that part of her Beatle education was we've been fortunate enough to take Beatle-related trips to following their footsteps in London, in Liverpool, in Hamburg, where they, really became musicians. So, it's been absolutely great. We've had everything from encounters with Yoko Ono, who was able to answer for my daughter Ella why the Beatles broke up.
What did she tell her?
I probably won't put it as good as Yoko, but she said in essence, because they grew up, they wanted to do their own thing, and they did. Which is pretty much the best answer I've ever heard to a question that Beatle fans have been asking now for 40-plus years.
Sure.
My daughter Ella became pen pals with the little old lady who lives in Ringo's house. So we've had some very magical experiences. And of course, the best of all was my daughter at 8 years old met Paul McCartney. Which was incredible. And I don't say that it's the day that I met Paul McCartney or my wife met Paul McCartney. It's the day our daughter met Paul McCartney. And it was a great experience. And when you live in a Beatle household and you put these people up on some kind of pedestal, and you think all these thoughts about them, and they can't live up to it, but he couldn't have been greater to her. And it was like he was just talking to her even in a crowded room of 100 or more people.
Wow. Yeah. And I love how you talked about her Beatles education. So what did you start with? What's the album you started with? I know you mentioned the song that you were singing to her, but what are some of the Beatles 101 lessons that you made sure to teach her?
Sure. You know, for a lot of kids, it's the gateway drug is Yellow Submarine, right? Because it's kind of a movie that kids love and adults love, and the music is wonderful. But for Ella, it was very interesting that, you know, she would attach to certain songs that weren't necessarily, you know, the ones that you would find on the Greatest Hits album. Things like Hey Bulldog or I'll Get You, kind of the obscure cuts. But she didn't know anybody. There was nobody there to tell her, well, this is a great Beatles song and this is a lower tier Beatles song.
Right.
She kind of connected to the music. And, you know, any time that they were on TV, especially, you know, later when she would see Paul or Ringo. I remember one time, first time she saw Paul on television, she's like, you know, he looks much older than he did in A Hard Day's Night. You know, is he okay? You know,
right.
I have to explain, because I think that for a lot of kids, when the Beatles are new to them, it's like the Beatles are new.
Right.
And that's one of the great things about it. The music and the story are as alive now as they've ever been.
What is the #1 most played Beatles song in your household?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, like with anything, it goes back and forth where you go into phases. I would say that when she was younger, it was the Hard Day's Night album, over and over and over. Now that she's in her teenage years and she's become a serious musician herself, it's the White Album all the time.
Sure.
And when you think about that progression from, say, 1964 to 1968, how much the music changed so quickly. But that's one of the things that we love about the Beatles, that we get to grow up with them, and we get to grow up with them in almost real time.
Yes. And I also wanted to ask what your most treasured Beatles memorabilia item is that you own. I'm not even talking albums, anything that
anything at all?
Yeah, anything.
It has to be the copy of High in the Clouds, Paul's children's book that he signed for Ella on that day in 2005.
Great.
And we have that in a very safe place.
Sure, I bet. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. And your own book, where can everybody find that?
You can get it on Amazon, iTunes, Nook, through Barnes & Noble, but the website is very easy to remember, www.beatlebaby.com.
Great. Jerry Hester, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you much.
Nice meeting you.
Appreciate it.
And thank you so much for joining us, all you Beatles fans out there. Have a great time this week. I'm Ashley Dvorkin.